black woman walks into a restaurant, but the waiter refuses to serve her due to her race. What he doesn't know is her son, a world-famous celebrity, is watching the scene unfold, and he's about to change everything. Welcome to our video. My name is Mark, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we dive into this powerful story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy emotional, thought-provoking stories, make sure to like this video, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update from us. Let's get started. The sun was shining brightly over the city, and the streets bustled with life as people went about their day. Inside a high-end restaurant named Elon's Bistro, the air was filled with soft classical music, the clinking of fine silverware and hushed conversations. The decor was luxurious. Marble floors, sparkling chandeliers, and tables adorned with crisp white linens. It was the kind of place where status mattered, and appearances were everything. Clara, a middle-aged black woman, stepped through the grand doors. She was dressed in a modest yet elegant outfit, a navy blue dress paired with a pearl necklace. She walked with grace and confidence, but as soon as she entered, a sudden silence seemed to ripple through the room. Some diners glanced at her with curiosity, while others exchanged knowing looks, their judgment barely concealed. Clara paid no attention. She had seen it all before. She approached an empty table by the window and sat down, taking in the beautiful view of the cityscape. Moments later, the head waiter, John, appeared. He was tall, middle-aged, with slick-back hair and an air of authority that suggested he'd been working here for years. John paused, scanning Clara from head to toe, his expression quickly shifting from neutral to cold. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said curtly. "This table is reserved." Clara glanced around the restaurant. Nearly half the tables were empty. "Oh, that's fine. I don't mind waiting for service here," she replied with a polite smile. John hesitated, his discomfort evident. "I think you might feel more comfortable somewhere else," he added, his tone sharp. Clara tilted her head slightly, her smile unwavering. "Why don't you tell me where I'd feel comfortable then?" John leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, this restaurant caters to a certain clientele and—" Clara interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "And I'm not your kind of clientele." The tension between them was palpable. Some diners turned to watch, while others pretended not to notice. John straightened, clearly irritated. "I'll see if we can find something for you," he muttered before walking away. Clara sat back in her chair, her calm demeanor intact. She glanced out the window, a knowing smile playing on her lips. She was expecting someone who would make John regret his behavior. Clara quietly whispered to herself, "You'll regret this." As Clara sat by the window, she observed the bustling street outside. She wasn't angry, no. Anger would have been too easy. Instead, she felt a quiet determination, the kind that came from years of facing similar situations. Clara adjusted her necklace, a small smile lingering on her lips. Minutes passed, and John returned with a forced smile. "Ma'am, unfortunately, all the tables are booked for the evening. I'll have to ask you to leave." His words were polite, but his tone dripped with condescension. Clara stood her ground. "I'll wait," she replied softly, her eyes steady on his. Before John could respond, the glass doors of the restaurant swung open and a tall, sharply dressed man in his mid-30s walked in. His tailored navy blue suit and polished shoes radiated success, and the air of confidence around him was impossible to ignore. He carried himself with an ease that turned heads, but his piercing gaze was focused solely on Clara. "Mom!" the man called out, his voice warm and filled with affection. The entire restaurant seemed to pause. Heads turned, eyes widened, and whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Clara's face lit up as she stood to greet him. "Oh, "There you are, darling," she said, wrapping him in a tight embrace. John, who had been observing the scene, looked visibly uncomfortable. He approached cautiously. "Excuse me, sir," he began, his tone more respectful than before. "Do you have a reservation?" The man turned his attention to John, his expression unreadable. "A reservation?" he repeated, his voice calm but firm. "No, I don't need one. I own this place." John's face turned pale, the realization sinking in. This wasn't a wealthy diner he could dismiss. He had insulted the owner's mother. The man glanced at his mother, concern flickering across his face. "Mom, is everything all right?" Clara patted his arm gently. "Oh, everything's fine, darling. Just a slight misunderstanding with your staff." John stammered. "I wasn't aware she was your mother, sir. My sincerest apologies." The man cut him off, his voice now steely. "Apologies? Is that all you have to say after treating my mother like she didn't belong here?" The room fell silent. John looked around nervously, searching for a way out of the situation. Clara's son wasn't finished. "You see, this isn't just about my mother. It's about how you treat people when you think no one is watching." The son leaned closer to John and said, "And trust me, people are always watching." The restaurant's ambience, once filled with soft murmurs and clinking glasses, now felt suffocatingly silent. Every eye was on Clara, her son, and John, the waiter who had unwittingly created this tension-filled moment. John fidgeted nervously, unsure of what to say. The once confident head waiter now looked like a man scrambling to keep his job. Clara's son, whose name was Ethan, maintained his steady gaze, his presence commanding respect without raising his voice. "Let's take a seat, Mom," Ethan said, his tone softening as he turned back to Clara. She smiled warmly. "Of course, darling. I think the table by the window suits us perfectly, don't you?" John hesitated for a moment, then hurried to pull out the chairs. "Please allow me," he mumbled, his hands shaking slightly. Clara took her seat gracefully, her composure unshaken. Ethan joined her, his calm demeanor masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. Once they were settled, Ethan glanced around the restaurant. The diners, sensing the gravity of the situation, tried to return to their meals, but their stolen glances betrayed their curiosity. "John," Ethan began, his voice cutting through the hushed room like a blade, "I'd like to hear your explanation for what happened here today. Please, take your time." John's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at Clara, then at Ethan, his face flushed with embarrassment. Finally, he stammered, I didn't realize who she was. If I had known." Ethan raised a hand to stop him. "If you had known," he repeated, his tone calm but sharp. "So, your treatment of people depends on who they are?" Just then, one of the diners, a well-dressed woman sitting at a nearby table, spoke up. "He treated me the same way last week," she said. Her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear, and heads turned once more. Ethan looked at the woman, his eyebrows raised. "Oh, please go on." The woman nodded. "I came here alone and he made me feel unwelcome. Said there were no tables, even though half the restaurant was empty. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now..." Her voice trailed off as she looked at John with disapproval. John's face turned an even deeper shade of red. He stammered, "That's not..." Before he could finish, another diner chimed in. "Same thing happened to my brother. He's not from around here," and John acted like he didn't belong. The murmurs grew louder, a ripple of discontent spreading through the room. Clara exchanged a glance with Ethan, who leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Interesting," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Seems like there's a pattern here, John. Care to explain?" Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto John's. "Or should I start thinking about what kind of manager I need to hire next?" The weight of Ethan's words sent an icy chill down John's spine. The room seemed smaller, the walls closing in as the murmurs among the diners intensified. Clara, calm yet quietly observant, rested her hands on the table and watched the scene unfold with a quiet dignity. Ethan tilted his head, waiting for John's response. When none came, he continued, "You see, John, when I first opened this restaurant, I had a vision, a place where anyone could come and feel welcome. A place where they'd leave not just satisfied with the food, but uplifted by the experience. Does that sound familiar to you?" John swallowed hard. "Yes, sir," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Then tell me," Ethan pressed, his voice firm but measured, "what happened to that vision today? Why does it seem like it only applies to certain people?" John's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape route. Finally, he took a shaky breath. "I didn't mean any harm, sir. I made a mistake." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "A mistake? It sounds like this mistake of yours happens often. Care to elaborate?" Before John could respond, a soft voice broke the tension. It was Clara. "Ethan," she said gently, "perhaps John needs a moment to reflect. Sometimes we're so caught up in our own assumptions that we forget to see people for who they truly are." The room went quiet again, Clara's words resonating deeply. Ethan turned to his mother, his expression softening. "You're right, Mom," he said. "But reflection is only meaningful when followed by accountability." Ethan looked back at John. "You see, John, the woman you dismiss so easily isn't just my mother. She's the reason this restaurant exists. She gave me the courage to follow my dreams when no one else believed in me. Every detail in this place, every color, every design, was inspired by her." Gasps echoed through the room as the diners pieced together the significance of Ethan's words. John's face went pale, the weight of his actions sinking in. Ethan continued, his voice steady. "And yet, you treated her as if she didn't belong. Tell me, John, what would you have done if I weren't here today? If no one was here to call you out?" John opened his mouth to speak, but once again, another voice interrupted him. This time, it was one of the kitchen staff, a young man named Brian who had been quietly watching from the doorway. "Excuse me, sir," Brian said hesitantly, stepping forward. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I think there's something you should know." Ethan turned his attention to Brian, intrigued. "Go on." Brian shifted uncomfortably, but pressed on. "John's behavior isn't just about customers. He's been treating some of us unfairly, too. He gives better shifts to certain people, and others, well, we get the leftovers." The revelation sent another wave of murmurs through the room. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Is that so?" Ethan leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Thank you, Brian. I think it's time we dig a little deeper into how things are run here. John, would you care to explain this as well?" The restaurant was now abuzz with whispers. Ethan's piercing gaze stayed locked on John, who looked like a man unraveling under the weight of his secrets. Clara observed silently, her calm demeanor masking the emotions she surely felt. "Brian," Ethan said, turning to the young kitchen staff member, "thank you for speaking up. That takes courage." He then shifted his focus back to John. "Well, John, is there something you'd like to say about these accusations?" John's lips trembled, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. It's not like that, sir," he stammered. Then how is it, John?" Ethan interjected, his voice firm but not raised. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you've been using this position to play favorites. Not just with customers, but with the very people who helped this restaurant run." The diners leaned forward in their seats, riveted by the unfolding drama. John wiped his brow, visibly struggling to find his words. I didn't mean for it to come across that way," he finally said. "It's just that some people, they fit in better than others." Ethan's eyebrows shot up. Fit in better? He repeated, his tone icy. What exactly does that mean, John? Are you suggesting that only certain people belong here? The room fell silent again, the weight of Ethan's words hanging heavily in the air. Clara broke the tension, her voice gentle yet commanding. John, she said, do you understand how damaging those words are? Fit in better. That kind of thinking creates walls where there should be doors. You've turned this place into something my son and I never intended. John looked at Clara, his eyes brimming with guilt. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Before anyone could respond, a voice called out from the back of the room. It was another diner, a middle-aged man in a business suit. Excuse me, he said, standing up. I've been coming to this restaurant for months, and I've seen this kind of thing happen more times than I can count. I always thought about saying something, but I didn't want to cause a scene. Maybe I should have. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The man continued, this place is amazing, and the food is excellent. But this kind of behavior, it ruins the experience. Ethan nodded solemnly. Thank you for speaking up, he said. It's never too late to do the right thing. John looked utterly defeated, his shoulders slumping as the accusations piled up. I know I messed up, he said, his voice trembling. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You'll do whatever it takes, he asked. Because making this right isn't about apologizing to me or my mother. It's about rebuilding the trust you've broken with the staff, the customers, and this community. Are you prepared for that kind of work, John? John nodded vigorously. Desperation etched across his face. Yes, sir, I am. Ethan sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. We'll see, he said quietly. But for now, I think it's time we bring this conversation to a wider audience. Let's make sure everyone understands what this restaurant stands for and what it won't tolerate. Ethan's words sent ripples of anticipation through the room. The idea of making this situation public unsettled John, who now looked visibly nervous. Clara, still calm, rested her hand on Ethan's arm. Are you sure about this? She asked softly. Ethan nodded, his expression resolute. Mom, this isn't just about us. This is about setting an example for everyone here. For John, for the staff, and for every person who steps through these doors. They need to know what we stand for. Turning to the room, Ethan addressed the diners with a steady voice. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your patience and understanding as we've addressed this matter. What happened today isn't just about one mistake or one person. It's about values. The values this restaurant was built on, and the values we must uphold. He paused, looking directly at John. And when those values are compromised, we have to take action, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. The crowd murmured in agreement. John shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the floor. Clara looked at her son with a mix of pride and concern, clearly understanding the weight of his decision. Ethan continued, I believe in second chances, but those chances must be earned, not given freely. John, you'll stay on as a waiter under one condition. You will undergo extensive training on customer service, diversity, and inclusion. And every week, you'll meet with me to discuss what you've learned and how you're applying it. John looked up, his face a mixture of relief and trepidation. Thank you, sir, he said. I won't let you down. Ethan raised a hand, stopping him. I'm not finished. You'll also personally apologize to every staff member and customer you've wronged. And you'll assist in organizing a community event that promotes inclusivity, an event that Clara will help oversee. The room erupted in murmurs, some of surprise, others of approval. John's face paled, but he nodded. I understand. I'll do it. Clara finally spoke, her voice warm but firm. John, change isn't easy, but it's necessary. If you're willing to truly open your heart and mind, You'll find it's worth the effort. Just as the tension in the room began to ease, the middle-aged businessman who had spoken earlier raised his hand again. "Excuse me, Ethan," he said. "I'd like to offer my help with that community event. I run a non-profit organization that focuses on workplace inclusivity. Maybe we can collaborate." Ethan's face lit up with a smile. "That's a generous offer," he said. "I'd be honored to work with you on this." Ethan turned back to the diners. "But this isn't just about us. It's about everyone in this room. If you've ever witnessed or experienced something like this, I want to hear your stories. Together, we can make this place and our community better for everyone." As Ethan's words settled over the room, the tension began to transform into something else. Hope. Diners who had been silent started nodding and murmuring in agreement. Clara, seated quietly by Ethan's side, looked at her son with pride. John took a deep breath, stepping forward. "I don't know if I can undo the harm I've caused," he said, his voice cracking. "But I promise I'll do everything I can to make things right. I'll start by apologizing to you, Mrs. Carter, and to everyone else I've disrespected." Clara's eyes softened. "It's not about undoing the past, John," she said gently. "It's about building a better future." Ethan stood and addressed the staff gathered near the kitchen. "You've heard John's promise. I expect all of us, myself included, to hold him accountable. But accountability isn't about punishment. It's about growth." The staff exchanged glances, some hesitant, others nodding in agreement. A young waitress named Emma stepped forward. "I've seen John treat customers unfairly before," she admitted. "But if he's serious about changing, I'm willing to support him. This restaurant is like a family, and families help each other grow." Her words were met with murmurs of approval, and Ethan smiled. "Thank you, Emma. That's exactly the kind of spirit we need." Clara then turned to the businessman, Mr. Powell, who had offered his nonprofit support. "If you're serious about partnering with us," she said, "I'd like to propose something bigger. A community event where we not only celebrate diversity, but also create lasting connections. Food has a way of bringing people together. Let's use it to start a conversation." Mr. Powell grinned. "I love that idea. Let's make it happen." Ethan nodded. "We'll make this event a priority. John, you'll lead the coordination alongside Emma and Mr. Powell. It's time to show everyone what true inclusivity looks like." Just as Ethan finished speaking, an elderly woman in the corner stood up, her voice steady and firm. "I've been coming here since this restaurant opened," she said. "This place means a lot to me. Today reminded me why. It's not just the food or the atmosphere, it's the people. Thank you, Ethan, for standing up for what's right. I'll be at that event to support you all." The entire room broke into applause. Clara wiped a tear from her eye, overwhelmed by the positive energy that had replaced the earlier tension. Over the next few weeks, the restaurant transformed into a hub of collaboration and community. The staff underwent training sessions, led by Mr. Powell's team, and John worked tirelessly to prove himself. He apologized to every person he had wronged, his sincerity gradually earning back the trust of his colleagues and customers. The community event became a huge success, with people from all walks of life coming together to celebrate diversity and inclusivity. Ethan and Clara, standing at the entrance, greeted each guest with smiles that radiated warmth and pride. John, serving food with a newfound humility, caught Ethan's eye and nodded. It was a silent acknowledgement of how far he had come and how much further he was willing to go. At the end of the event, Ethan addressed the crowd. This restaurant was founded on the belief that food brings people together. Today, we've proven that it can also heal, teach, and inspire. Let's carry this spirit into everything we do. As the applause filled the air, Clara leaned over to Ethan. "Your father would be proud," she whispered. Ethan smiled, his heart full. "I think he'd be proud of all of us." And with that, the restaurant's story became a beacon of hope. showing that even in moments of conflict, there's always a path toward understanding and change.